What are you laughing about?
Count to 18 by threes.
What are you talking about? Judith, you're on. Judith, we hear you. Hold it a second. I'm just going to get us up on Facebook briefly. Take a second here. We are. Judith, you're on. We hear you.
She's laughing.
I guess it's something, a conversation.
I'm glad somebody is so happy.
It's a conversation that she's having that we're not privy to. Anyways,
Boy, that expression, Rabbi.
So I wanted to hold it one second. I just want to make sure we're going up for the people that are joining us on Facebook.
How are you doing today, Rabbi?
I'm doing okay. Thank you for asking, Mike. We're coming to, I definitely feel like
all right. Are you back on your home screen?
Hold it a second, Judith.
Okay.
I'm muting you. Okay, now you're muted. Yeah. Yeah, we definitely feel like we're coming to the end of this Shiva. I mean, I guess if I, the funeral was on Thursday for my dad, as I think everybody knows. But if I was following it from the day that he passed, it would have been over last night. But you do it from the funeral. So funeral was on Thursday, so we're going to end tomorrow morning. And so, but I definitely feel we're coming to an end. And for my mom, a couple years ago, I had one funeral that I had to do during the time. It was the only time I went out. This time I didn't go out at all. I mean, literally did not leave the front of my house. I didn't go past the driveway, but it was much easier too, because everyone else is doing the same thing. So it's much easier sitting Shiva when the whole country is sitting Shiva. And honestly, I mean, the difference is amazing, because I didn't really feel anywhere near as much pressure to, to go out and to do stuff. And again, knowing that other people are dealing with the same kinds of restrictions. And it really is almost like we've been sitting Shiva for, for a long time. 6 months now. So that made it a little bit easier this time. It's also nice having my family all here. My kids, my girls are all home right now. And so, that's obviously a nice part of it too, is having the family together and the rest of the people in here. So today, definitely studying Torah or Midrash in honor of my dad today. We try to, if there's somebody who's passed or a yard site that we can honor or dedicate study of Torah. And you are allowed to, you're not obligated to study Torah, but you are allowed to prepare Torah during the Shiva period. So this definitely is kind of like that. I'm more facilitating than anything else. I will say, as we bring in the rest of our friends here, that I was definitely looking forward to this today. So people would say, hey, this it's hard to do during Shiva, but study and being together with people today is also comforting. We've had Shiva Minyan every night, and I know a lot of you have joined in the last few nights. Tonight is the last night of the service, and then tomorrow we're putting together putting together for JLTV a kind of a compilation of some of the people who joined us on Shiva Minyan, and then the tribute video that we did for my dad a couple of years ago, and then some beautiful pieces for the funeral service that were recorded by Cantor Nate Lamb from Stephen S. Wise. He recorded, and he was very close friends with my dad. He recorded some of the traditional pieces for a service. They're going to be on. It's a 1 hour funeral that, again, we had a very small 15-person service with just my immediate family last Thursday. We're going to have the kind of funeral with a you know, the community or whatever you'd say, you know, to have a you know, nice service for my dad. So it's going to be on video, but I think it's going to come out okay. I hope it comes out better than okay. But that's what I've been working on too the last few days. That 1 hour event that's going to be, I say an event, I mean, I don't know really what to call it. It's a funeral, but it's not really a funeral, but it is a funeral in any kind of meaningful way that we would call it, with the prayers and with the eulogies. It'll be ready Wednesday night. So it's going to be up on JLTV at 8 o'clock, and I'll post it up on Facebook and stuff. So you have a chance to see it. But again, it's kind of putting together, you know, about 15 minutes of people speaking, which was really hard, by the way. We had 3.5 hours. Not all of it were eulogies or you know, kind of like people, you know, giving their own stories. But it was hard to condense that, you know, to 15, 20 minutes. So it just kind of took 30 seconds from about, you know, 15, 20 people, maybe a minute. So we're going to get started here today. What I didn't, excuse me, what I didn't know today
Here you go.
was that,
Do you see
hey.
the microphone?
Yeah.
we hear you again, Judith.
Okay, go ahead and mute yourself.
You're bringing on your dad. So this is important. We'll let you bring on your dad. I didn't know what we were going to be reading.
I have the meeting, but I don't have a microphone.
You're on.
All right, hold on, I'll mute you. Hang on.
You're on, Daniel. Judith, your dad is on.
Oh, he says I'm on.
I can hear
You're
you
on.
loud and clear. We don't see you.
Okay, thank you.
I'll talk to you later, Dad.
All right.
Okay,
Both on.
Bye.
goodbye. Thank you.
We hear you. We hear you, Mr. Cohen. So
Okay.
oh, now I've muted everybody. Sorry. Excuse me. I didn't know, let me start again. I didn't know that when we started this, everyone's unmuted again. When we started this process years ago, as we go through the text and as we read, you know, we never know exactly where we're going to end. We're not reading a portion where we read a few chapters a week and we know where we're going to end. As it so happens, today we ended at a place that is very appropriate and very powerfully relevant for me right now. And again, you talk about weird kinds of miracles, coincidences, whatever you want to call it. We're reading about Jacob blessing his family, calling his children and his grandchildren together. And there's pieces of this today that we're going to read. I had no idea, you know, we were going to be reading this as I'm in the midst of Shiva, or towards the end of my Shiva. So today we left off with Jacob towards the end of his life. He knows he's going to die. And the last part we read was that he asks his family to bury him back in the land of Israel. And what we read last time is that the reason why people want to be buried in Israel and why they still want to be buried to this day is so that their bodies can be resurrected. At the day of resurrection, they get to be resurrected where the resurrection is taking place. Otherwise, they have to crawl through the earth to get to that place. So the closer you are to Jerusalem, the better. Just so you know, and I mentioned this before, my dad actually chose to be buried at Home of Peace Cemetery down in East LA last week. And for him, that was where he wanted to be buried in LA because it was a historical place. It's the first Jewish cemetery. Actually, the first Jewish cemetery, as you know, was up by Dodger Stadium. That stadium and the where it exists right now underneath the Fire Academy, when it was kind of taken over by the city, they moved all the people who had been buried there over the previous 50, 60 years. No, actually almost 100 years. And because that cemetery went back to the 1850s, they buried them, they exhumed them and reburied them all down in East LA at Home Peace, right by the 710-5 junction. And that is the old cemetery for LA before there was a Mount Sinai and the Hillside and all those other places. That's where Louis B. Mayer's buried. The Warner brothers are within spitting distance of where my dad is now. And he really wanted to be buried there because he loved the history of Jewish LA. And that is, the home piece is the history of Jewish LA. But of course, there's another place where Jewish people like to be buried, whether they're from LA or New York or Chicago or Brazil or, Australia, South Africa. They like to be buried in the land of Israel. And it all goes back to Jacob, who dies in Egypt, but wants to be buried back in the land. And that's the last part we read. So again, it's a very appropriate section for me to be reading right now. And where we're going to pick up right now, and we'll turn it over to Rosemary, is it says that he had to make his son, and this is right from the Torah, he had to make his son Joseph swear that he would bury him there. I will point out that, and since we're going to get into it right away, I'll show it to you. The text is strange because, let me share it up here, the Torah. It is not what you'd expect as far as how Joseph makes his family swear. It seems like either he doesn't trust them, which you could kind of understand why he doesn't trust them, or again, he definitely seems to be ultra concerned that he has to make them swear in a very traditional way. And let me, 1 second, let me just show why the Torah was not up there. Here it is. So, when he says the blessings to his sons and his grandsons, he said, he said, right here. This is actually at a moment before he blesses, sometime before he blesses them. He says, when I lie down with my fathers, let me share. Are you able to see this right now? Am I sharing it? Yes? Is it coming up?
It was up, guy. You switched it
Yeah,
out.
it was up fine, Rabbi.
There was no green line around it, so I get worried when I don't see that green line. Okay, here it is. For sure, the green line's on now.
Yeah.
He said to Joseph, he said, this is the end of chapter 47, do me this favor, place your hand under my thigh as a pledge of your steadfast loyalty. Please do not bury me in Egypt. When I lie down with my fathers, take me up from Egypt and bury me in their burial place. And he replied, I will do as you have spoken. And he said, swear to me. And he swore to him. Then Israel bowed at the head of the bed. So it doesn't seem like this is a normal kind of situation in that there is a definite emphasis on this that Joseph is made to swear more than once, and that the method that he does it by placing, his hand under his thigh goes back to Abraham and his servant Eliezer, and he makes Eliezer swear that he's going to find a wife for Isaac. That this is some kind of ritual, of heavy-duty ritual, by the way, of making somebody essentially swear on the most private part of their body. Let's put it that way. And it obviously was used for very, very important promises, oaths, and the Midrash is going to pick up on that. So let's take a look at what is going on here according to the Midrash. It says right here, Jacob expressed these last wishes 3 times. Such is the requirement of good breeding and preferring a request. You actually don't say it 1 time. But we'll start right here. In the last period, Rosemary, if you want to start reading.
Okay. In the last period of Jacob's life, one can see how true it is that even a king depends upon favors in a strange land. Jacob, the man for the sake of whose merits the whole world was created, for the sake of whom Abraham was delivered from the fiery furnace, had to ask services of others while he was among strangers. And when Joseph promised to do his bidding, he bowed himself before his own son. For it is a true saying, bow before the fox in his day, the day of his power.
Yep.
He
So,
was not,
well, hold on one second. I just want to point out that the bow before the fox in the day of his power. That's a parable, a saying that even a fox has his day. Which again, the foxes were usually considered the clever or the tricky animals, not necessarily the king of the beast, but occasionally they get power. The lion is the king, and sometimes the fox has his day. It's not a really high praise for Joseph, right? Because it's basically saying that Jacob shouldn't have bowed before Joseph. But it also tells us a few things about Jacob that the Midrash, the rabbis felt. Number one, that he is very special. That Jacob, and we're going to see this really, really powerfully in today's Midrash, that Jacob is different than his ancestors. And when the rabbis tried to figure out and tried to make sure that we understood, to teach us what makes Jacob special, it comes down to this. Abraham and Isaac are clearly important people. Abraham, you can make the argument, is the first Jew. I mean, no one can be really bigger than him. There's an interesting thing that you're going to see today, and you'll see it today. What makes Jacob different were that all his sons are the ancestors of the Jewish people. Abraham and Isaac had sons that didn't go the right direction. The rabbis will tell us. And because of that, Jacob is to some extent the ancestor. He's our ancestor, and he's only our ancestor. Nobody else can claim lineage through Jacob. And so for that reason, Jacob has a different place amongst the patriarchs, which is why they can get off with saying something like, for his merits, the whole world was created. Again, Jacob, we're going to see, has nowhere near close to a perfect life and has had a very hard life, actually, up until this point. But the difference is that the people who come after him are all going to be worthy to some extent. Even when they're not worthy, they're still supposed to be worthy. And so for that reason, Jacob is different. So keep that in mind as we read this. This is really kind of the theme for today, is Jacob's descendants, why Jacob is so important. So here's about the Eliezer, the swearing that we just read, the swear underneath under my leg. Yeah.
he was not satisfied with a simple promise from Joseph that he would do his wish. He insisted upon his taking an oath by the sign of the covenant of Abraham, putting a hand under his thigh in accordance with the ceremony customary among the patriarchs. But Joseph said, "You treat me like a slave. With me you have no need to require an oath. Your command suffices." Jacob, however, urged him, saying, "I fear Pharaoh may command you to bury me in the sepulchre with the kings of Egypt. I insist that you take an oath, and then I will be at peace." Joseph gave in, though he would not submit to the ceremony that Eliezer had used to confirm the oath he took at the request of his master Abraham. The slave acted in accordance with the rules of slavery. The free man acted in accordance with the dictates of freedom. And in a son, that thing would have been unseemly, which was becoming in a slave.
So here's an interesting midrash, which gives us a different take on it, which is that Jacob shouldn't have made Joseph swear like a slave, that this was not the way this is not the ceremony, or the way the ritual should not have happened like this. So this is an interesting midrash that kind of gives us a different take, which is that Jacob did not do the right thing here. But again, it also begs the question, what was Jacob worried about? Jacob was worried about the fact that the Egyptians would not let him be buried in Israel, and they would somehow keep his body like they did in a tomb, in a pyramid, something that would have not allowed him to be buried in a Jewish way, and more importantly, would turn him into an object of veneration. And he didn't, that's what he was concerned about. But again, maybe he didn't do it in the right way. Now, again, there's this understanding that Jacob is telling this to Joseph. What if Joseph is not the last one standing, which again, we read last week, he's not going to be. He's going to die earlier than his brothers did. Again, to some extent, that's seen as a punishment to Joseph, that Joseph, to some extent, deserved not to live as long, which was a little troubling to hear. But look, the rabbis had to figure out, why does he live so much less time than his fathers and grandfathers? He only lives 110 years instead of 147 years, or excuse me. Again, he dies roughly the same time as Jacob. I mean, that's the bottom line is that he doesn't live much longer. So making him swear the oath, maybe that's not the best idea. But let's read what happens to Jacob as he's saying goodbye. And again, couldn't find a much more relevant section.
Excuse me, can you hear me?
Yeah, Daniel, yeah.
Yeah. I read somewhere that 110 years is the Egyptian traditional perfect age.
I haven't heard that. I don't remember hearing that. That's a great teaching.
I read it somewhere. I was never explained to me, but they say just as 120 is the Jewish traditional perfect age, 110 is the Egyptian.
Interesting. We'll have to look that up. And of course, in Italians, it's 100. Italians only get 100. They say cent'anni, right? Cent'anni is the Italian, 100 years is what they say when you're Italian, right? Cent'anni. I don't say it very well, but I guess, 100, 110, 120. So Jews are supposed to get, if we're really, really good, we get 120 years, which is really nice. I remember telling my stepmother at her 60th birthday a few years back, I said, you're lucky because you're 60, which means you're only halfway through the Jewish lifespan. And I said, you were born an Italian Catholic. I said, you went from 100 years to 120. You got 20 bonus years. I also she's half Irish too. I don't know if there's an Irish maximum lifespan, but yeah, it's interesting. We'll have to look that up to see if the Egyptians had 100.
What's if you're in the mafia, the standard might be a little bit different.
I knew it would now open it up to I knew as soon as I said that there's going to be
and the Irish, they have whiskey, the water of life. So maybe it's endless.
That's unfortunately, we know this is not the case for people who are drinking a lot of whiskey. 100 years is almost impossible, but not impossible, but almost impossible. So here's what he says. So again, Jacob is not going to outlive his son Joseph by much longer, is I think kind of the point here. The rabbis noticed. All right, here we go.
When Joseph swore to bury his father in Palestine, he added the words, "As you command me to do, so also will I beg my brothers on my deathbed to fulfill my last wish and carry my body from Egypt to Palestine."
Yeah, and so this is this recognition that he's going to have to, that Joseph knows he's going to have to tell his brethren the same thing. So,
but he doesn't. But he doesn't.
He doesn't tell. He doesn't tell who?
He doesn't tell his brothers. Oh, yes, he does. Yes, he does.
Yeah, he tells the Jews, "You've got to bury me too." So it is. Yeah. It's a passing of a tradition, which I'll ask the question. I mean, we have to ask the question now. Well, it's a question that doesn't have an answer. We don't know where the other brothers are buried, by the way. I want to point that out. Joseph, we know, gets taken up because we read in Exodus, they took Joseph's bones up. It's a very powerful scene. It's, as we mention every year, it's in the 10 Commandments. It's in the movie. DeMille made sure that scene is in the 10 Commandments. Very powerful scene. In the movie, they put it in, is my point. But what is so interesting is we don't know where Don and Naphtali are buried. We don't know where Judah is buried, for that matter. I mean, there's traditions that they were also buried in the land of Israel, but the Torah doesn't tell us that. So we have to create a midrash about what happens with the other sons when they die and when they die. But this idea that Joseph it inspires Joseph. And let's take a look again. The Torah is going to deal with this issue of Jacob, of the process of Jacob saying goodbye, which is, if I lose it a little bit over this next page, you'll understand why. All right, let's continue.
Jacob, noticing the Shekinah over the bed's head where she always rests in a sick room, bowed himself upon the bed's head, saying, I thank you, O Lord my God, that none who is unfit came forth from my bed, but my bed was perfect. He was particularly grateful for the revelation God had vouchsafed him concerning his firstborn son Reuben, that he had repented of all his trespass against his father and atoned for it by penance. He was thus assured that all his sons were men worthy of being the progenitors of the 12 tribes, and he was blessed with happiness such as neither Abraham nor Isaac had known, for both of them had had unworthy as well as worthy sons.
So that's the theme for today. What made Jacob different? What makes Jacob's death different? What is the difference that happens to Jacob when he dies? Is he is assured that his sons were men worthy of being progenitors of the 12 tribes. That Jacob had that peace of mind at the end of his life that his kids were going to be okay, and
including Shimon and Levi.
Well, we're going to get to that, and the rabbis recognize that Shimon and Levi don't get blessed with a great blessing in it, but there's almost this understanding, and we're going to see the way the Midrash balances that out, and they kind of figure out a clever way to make Shimon and Levi okay. But to know that your kids are going to be able to become a community together, that again, for better or worse, some of them, not every one of your descendants is going to live up to the expectations, but that they're bound together, that all of them together make up a community, the 12 tribes. That's not, and again, there is something different about the community. It's bound together by law. It's bound together by the Torah. But that's not the case with Isaac's sons, Jacob and Esau. They're not bound together. And Abraham had lots of sons, and some of them, some of his descendants become the Amalekites. So, this is not, there's something different that happens to Jacob, and the rabbis here recognize that. Now, of course, the language of it is very interesting because it talks about the bed, that Jacob was in his bed when this happens. Now, of course, the bed, you're sick, you're on your bed, kind of makes sense. But the rabbis point out that this is different. This is not, there's language here that's being used that doesn't seem like a normal kind of situation. So what they do, first of all, is they draw out the fact that when somebody is dying and the person is, the person is about to go, that the Shekhinah, the divine presence, was there. That's pretty powerful. That the divine presence is there at the bedside of the person who's sick, and essentially, again, here, not just sick but dying, about to leave. That's pretty powerful. That reminds you that when you're visiting somebody in bed, on their deathbed, that you're in a very holy place. I mean, if the Shekhinah, if the divine presence is there, I mean, that's the same as the Mishkan. That's the same as the tabernacle. The place that somebody is when they're dying is literally a holy place. That's pretty powerful. And again, we've got Reverend Lynn on the line right now. She's been there many times. We've got Mary Schwartz, who's been there more than Reverend Lynn and I combined and multiplied out many times, because Mary was a hospice nurse for many, many, many years. And that is a place where, again, we recognize that we're in that place by the side of someone who's about to pass, that it's not a normal situation. It's not a normal time when you're around a bed. And the rabbis make that connection, by the way, because they talked about Reuben, who slept with his stepmother, with Bilhah. And so this is one of the things that we hear is that Reuben is forgiven. Reuben committed a sin through the bed. And again, the rabbis sometimes make it that he didn't really sleep with her, that he just moved her bed. I mean, the Torah seems pretty clear that Reuben did something really bad. Is the oldest son, that he essentially slept with a wife of his father, which again, there's a reason that is pointed out in the Torah too, which is that Adoniah, the son of David, does the same thing with one of his father David's concubines, and of course he gets killed for it. Solomon makes sure that he dies. So the fact that the oldest son of David did that, and it's written about and it's recorded, and it seems like, again, it really, really happened, there might be a reason why we have a story that Reuben does the same thing. And again, Reuben, according to the Midrash, is forgiven for it, though, which is interesting. And so he definitely knows now that his son Reuben has been forgiven, and that gives him peace. But of course, it's one of the reasons why Reuben is not given the birthright, the what he should have as the oldest son, the primogeniture, the double portion. And so Reuben doesn't get that, but at least he's forgiven. At least his tribe gets to continue. And again, we're gonna see more of this, but I'm just gonna kind of tell you why you're gonna see more of it. So again, this is all about the kids, and about all of them, even when they've screwed up, all of them deserve a place amongst the tribes. And it's confusing, I promise you. There's a reason why the rabbis are going through these things, because again, it's confusing. So this is a tough one for me right now, but let's read it.
Until the time of Jacob, death had always come upon men suddenly and snatched them away before they were warned of the imminent end by sickness. Once Jacob spoke to God, saying, "O Lord of the world, a man dies suddenly, and he is not laid low first by sickness, and he cannot acquaint his children with his wishes regarding all he leaves behind. But if a man first fell sick and felt that his end were drawing nigh, he would have time to set his house in order." And God said, "Verily, your request is sensible, and you shall be the first to profit by the new dispensation." And so it happened that Jacob fell sick a little while before his death.
Keep going.
His sickness troubled him grievously, for he had undergone much during his life. He had worked day and night while he was with Laban, and his conflicts with the angel and with Esau, though he came off victor from both, had weakened him, and he was not in a condition to endure the hardships of disease.
All right. Well, where to start? So the first is that according to Midrash, even though we read about Isaac on his deathbed, and we know that Isaac was thought he was on his deathbed, he wasn't. He calls his family close to, says he wants to bless his sons, but his sons, well, he's around for a lot longer. Isaac was a false alarm. Isaac ends up living a lot longer, decades longer. Jacob, on the other hand, seems to have some type of progressive illness, degenerative illness, that he asks for, because he says he wants to be able to set his house in order. And so he asks God to be able to have that happen. Now, the second part of the Midrash says that it didn't work well for him because he couldn't handle it. That because he had been weakened earlier in life from all of his surus, of all of his troubles with his father-in-law, his troubles with his brother, his struggle with the angel, he physically couldn't handle it. And so this, even though he'd asked for it, it didn't work out well for him. He couldn't handle the illness.
And just so you know, the dining room's open up again.
Really?
Mhm.
All right.
So can I get a second lunch?
So
Thanks.
You're welcome.
here's the thing, folks. It doesn't always work out that way. That just because we get time to put our stuff in order, it doesn't always work that way. Many people today are not gonna die suddenly. The Torah kind of tells us, well, there's an advantage to this, which is that you can be prepared. And as somebody who's been intimately involved with this now twice in the last couple of years, you're never prepared. And on top of that, it very rarely happens in the movies. Like you say goodbye to the people, and they get to impart some final wisdom to you, and that it goes like this. It doesn't go like this a lot. It didn't go like this for me in either case of my parents, and I didn't get that time with them to hear those kinds of parting words, if you will. By the time my dad passed, he couldn't communicate at all. And in the last few months, he had pretty much, because of dementia, Lewy body dementia, had lost his ability to really figure out how to say much of anything. They're just the last words he was able to say were kind of nonsensical, and it was hard to hear anything. The last thing that we heard from him a couple weeks before he passed was thank you, and that was very clear. We heard the thank you, and I don't know what he was specifically saying for, but it was nice to hear that, and it was very clear. But we didn't have this. That being said, knowing that even if you do have time to say goodbye, and even if you have time to kind of get used to it, we can't assume that our last wishes are going to be conveyed in a coherent way, which is why many people have taken seriously the responsibility of creating an ethical will and actually writing this stuff down when you're coherent and able and have the time to do it. Given the fact that we're not doing as much as we would like to right now, let me encourage you, especially at this time of year, as we come to the end of the year on the Jewish calendar, time of reflection, a time of doing a soul search, that again, and the bottom line is that we oftentimes do not know when we'll pass. There are still lots of people who unfortunately pass in an instant. Trust me when I tell you that it still happens a lot. It's a good thing to do, to write down those things that you'd like to have said, to write down the instructions you'd like to have for the way you want to be memorialized, and the way you'd like to have your service be conducted, and the principles you want to pass on to your children and grandchildren. We've been doing it for a long time in the Jewish tradition. Ethical wills go back literally over 1,000 years, a couple thousand years to some extent, if you kind of read some of the Jewish texts like Ben Sirach and some of the texts ancient texts that we have in Aramaic and Greek and Hebrew. Some of the texts we found are clearly last wills and testaments, and it is important to do. It is very rare that somebody gets to do this in a coherent way, unfortunately, in the end of their lives. So I definitely recommend it. It's not a fun thing to do, but it's an important thing to do. And I think in the end, it becomes one of the most important things we ever do. And a lot of people have their financial will in order, or actually a lot of people don't, but some people do, but they don't have their ethical will written, and they don't have those things done. So ideally we get a little preparation, but it doesn't always happen, and it very rarely happens that we're in full mental capacity and full control of who we are by that point. So I wish I could say that I had conversations with my family, with either one of my parents, but neither one of them went gently. And neither one of them said, I'm ready to go. And neither one of them said, I'm saying goodbye now. Neither one of them did that. So, again, it's amazing how the Midrash points these things out 2,000 years ago. Sometimes we get lucky and are able to do this, but it shouldn't be luck. So please take a moment to at least consider how you want to do it and how you set up that ethical will. And you know what? I did it a few years ago. I'll do it again. I'm going to post up in honor of the Midrash and in honor of my own situation. I'm going to post up how to do an ethical will again. Maybe keep it up all the time so that this important step can be done by you and by, again, the people in your circle. I have a funeral tomorrow for a 93-year-old who died of COVID, who basically said, I don't care if I'm going to die. I don't want to be locked in my house anymore. I guess that's part of his ethical will, but I don't know. I'm going to post it up, everybody, for you. So anyways, any comments or questions about the way we go? Let's take a look.
I have a question.
Yeah, please.
I have a question. When does the concept of Malach HaMavet appear?
The angel of death. We're going to have it. We're going to have it in the Midrash, right? So we know it pops up in the Midrash. We definitely have it in this Midrash today. Actually, you'll see a little bit more of it. The angel of death, at least in the Midrash, works at the behest of God and only can do what God says, and has, I would say, to some extent, limited power, especially over the righteous, in the sense that he has a job to do, but he, in some cases, is almost overwhelmed by how good the people are that he has to take, especially, again, the patriarchs and people like Moses. But we will see it today, and it starts appearing in the rabbinic texts. And what's interesting about the angel of death, of course, is we have other cultures that have angels or deities, and of course the Egyptians had Anubis and the different gods of the dead. But the angel of death in our tradition is limited in power, as much as the Egyptians and some other cultures venerated the angels or the deities surrounding death with a reverence. The angel of death in Judaism is treated, I'm not going to say like a joke, but he definitely can, number one, be reasoned with or argued with or humiliated. But oftentimes in the Midrash, the angel of death basically goes back to God and says, I can't do anything here. This person's too righteous for me. Or, what you take the person because I can't. The angel of death in Judaism is, I wouldn't say weakened, but it's not like we're looking forward to see, we're not going to laugh at the angel of death, but there is this sense that when somebody is truly righteous, they have nothing to fear. And I think that's the key with our version of the angel of death. But you'll see a little bit of it here in this text, because the Torah kind of opens it up. Torah definitely doesn't say there's an angel of death, but it opens up this idea that God appears to Jacob, and then Jacob also talks about angels here at the end. So he does kind of open it up for the angel of death, even though, again, it's not in the Torah, not mentioned once, the angel of death. So let's read what he says.
The blessing of Ephraim and Manasseh. When the years of Jacob's sojourn in Egypt, all the years of Jacob's sojourn in Egypt, Asenath, the wife of Joseph, was his constant nurse. When she saw his end drawing nigh, she spoke to Joseph. I have heard that one who is blessed by a righteous man is as though he had been blessed by the Shekinah. Therefore, bring your sons here, that Jacob may give them his blessing.
Wow. Okay. So here's a really, really interesting midrash. So Osnat, again, is Joseph's wife. According to the midrash that the rabbis loved, she's actually the daughter of Dinah, so she's actually an Israelite too. So I mean, Joseph's her uncle, but they'd rather her be married. They'd rather that than the other possibilities that she's just a normal Egyptian lady. No matter what, she does something really, really special here. I mean, very important, because what she does is she says to Joseph, let's get our kids blessed by Jacob now, because the Shekhinah is there. The divine presence is in the room right now. She's been his nurse. She's been taking care of him. She's been taking care of her father-in-law, which is, and also her grandfather. It's her father-in-law / grandfather, but she's been taking care of him. And this is a really special thing we read about Osnat, that she is this caretaker. Interesting. All right. Here's the interesting thing the rabbis point out with this midrash.
Though Joseph was a devoted and loving son to his father, he was not in constant attendance upon him, because he wanted to avoid giving him the opportunity of inquiring into the circumstances of his coming to Egypt. He was apprehensive that Jacob might curse his sons and bring death upon them if he discovered the facts connected with their treacherous dealings with Joseph. He took good care, therefore, never to be alone with his father, but as he desired to be kept informed of his welfare, he arranged a courier service between himself and Jacob.
So here's an interesting question the rabbis ask. Why does it say that Jacob sends for Joseph, and why isn't Joseph there? Why doesn't Joseph seem to know what's going on with his father? And so here's an interesting answer that they give, which is that Joseph wasn't with his father a lot, and he didn't spend time with him alone. Now, an easy answer is that Joseph is just not a very attentive son. He's a very busy son, right? He's running Egypt, so he's got a lot of duties. Or again, that being around his father is a reminder that that he's Israelite. He's not Egyptian. All those are possibilities. Those are all the easy possibilities. But the rabbis don't want to go down that road, because that means Joseph is kind of self-centered and not very attentive to his father. So they throw out another possibility, which is that Joseph didn't want to be around Jacob, because if he was, he'd spill the beans and let his father know how bad his brothers were, and that his brothers would then be condemned for it. So he did it to protect his brothers. He didn't want to be around them because he didn't want to be around the father without them, because he didn't want to be pressed by Jacob, bless you. And he felt that as long as they're all together, it's probably not going to devolve into that scene of what happened back there with the being thrown into the pit business. Because it's interesting, the Torah never recounts how Joseph speaks to his father and lets him know that everything is okay. That's always kind of an open question here. I mean, we always assume that Jacob is told what really happened, but we don't actually hear that in the Torah. It never says that Joseph said to his father, I got thrown in a pit by my brothers. I got pulled up. There's never that sense. So the rabbis hold out this possibility. And I know that this seems far-fetched, and I know that this is not going to be where you're going to necessarily have gone, but the rabbis hold out this possibility that this whole time Jacob is laboring under the illusion that the brothers had nothing to do with this, that somehow Joseph survived an attack from an animal, wound up, in Egypt, but the brothers didn't have anything to do with it. So this is something that the rabbis actually hold out. And the reason, of course, is that, well, what would Jacob do if he knew? He'd have to condemn the brothers. And there never is this condemnation of the brothers in the Torah. So the rabbis feel that maybe that's what happened. And that's why they have this interesting midrash that Joseph doesn't want to be alone with his father because he doesn't ever want to tell him the story. So that's an interesting midrash. It's not, again, we may never have thought of that, but the rabbis thought of it, and because the possibility that Jacob would find out about it and then be cool with it was not something they were willing to entertain. They were saying there must have been some kind of like willing participation. I mean, all the participants willingly were oblivious to what really happened. And that's quite
an elephant to have in the room.
It's an amazing elephant to have in the room, but it is this weird thing that we won't talk about it. And it really does happen with families. I mean, it's like,
That's true.
I mean, sometimes grandkids know the story the parents won't talk about. And I mean, who's going to quantify or who qualifies what's a worse horrendous thing? But there are things that happen in families and you're like, nobody talks about this, and it really does happen. And
does the Midrash ever ask why Joseph never called home?
Well, we talked about it. You weren't there. We did talk about this. We don't have that Midrash. That's the Midrash that we want. We want the answers for why doesn't he ever let anybody know he's okay? And again, part of it could be this connection to letting them know he's okay is going to alert the father, Jacob, that what the brothers did. And Joseph wants to prevent that from happening. Joseph is so concerned with his brother's welfare that he's willing to continue to be in thought of his dead, or continue to go along with this situation, is because he's protecting his brothers. So this is a really, really, I mean, all of these possibilities are here. Now, again, the rabbis are going to comment on that. By the way, they're going to say, did Jacob really not know? Jacob talks to God. Jacob has prophetic gifts. Does he really not know what happened? And they're willing to kind of go along with this idea that everybody, including Jacob, willingly wouldn't talk about it. And there is something very, very powerful about that in the family dynamics of what kinds of stories, what kind of realities families deal with where they don't talk about it. And again, I mean, there are horrific stories of what happens and that families won't talk about. So I've been shocked occasionally, and I mean, I don't assume anything is possible. And I've seen it. I've seen it with my own eyes. So there is this interesting idea that this is all part of the dysfunction. And we got to this point. And so what sometimes happens is we don't talk about it. It's easier just to continue on like nothing happened. I'm not going to give a judgment on it because, first of all, this story happens thousands of years before we understand the full weight of what psychology and what human health, mental health tells us about the way you have to deal with these kind of things. But it's pretty powerful. Not exactly, again, what you assumed. So this is the blessings, though, for Joseph's sons, which in the Torah happens before the rest of the sons are blessed. Ephraim and Manasseh get blessed before the rest of the sons. Let's read why.
Now, when Joseph received the news of his father's having fallen sick through his messenger, as well as through Ephraim, who Jacob was instructing in the Torah, he hastened to the land of Goshen, taking his 2 sons with him. He desired to have certainty upon 5 points. Would his father bless his 2 sons who were born in Egypt? And if so, would he appoint them to be heads of tribes? Would he assign the rights of the firstborn to himself? And if so, would he divest Reuben of such rights altogether? And why had his father buried his mother Rachel by the wayside and not carried her body to the family tomb at Machpelah?
All right, so let's pause right there. So, look.
These are things the rabbis want to know.
Well, yeah, but there is something really powerful here too, especially that last one. Because the other ones are like, hey, I gotta worry about my kids, right? I gotta worry about my future. How are my kids going to be treated? They were not born in the land of Israel. Are they really Israelites? Are they going to get what is coming to them because, I got elevated to the top? Are they now the top? Those are the questions that are the obvious ones because we actually get, we know we get the answers to this. The last one's kind of wild though, because that's the one where he says, I got to talk to my dad about why my mother isn't buried in the family plot. We're going to talk about death here, and I'm going to bring this up. Now, again, it is a really interesting part of the family dynamics, which is Rachel isn't buried in the cave, and Joseph, being her son, is kind of fighting for her, and her memory and her legacy. And so it shows us that, that he had this connection to his mother that that it's important for him to get closure on. And again, it's in the Torah, so that's why it's here too. There is a discussion, or is a statement that Jacob has at the end of his life about Rachel. And so the rabbis basically are going to say that was prompted by Joseph, that Joseph wanted an answer. And it's kind of an interesting story, putting it in Joseph's mouth. I always just like the fact that Jacob never forgot Rachel and was heartbroken over her death. But the rabbis basically are going to say here that Joseph also wanted to know, as a dutiful son and as the protector of her memory, he wants to know. And it's a pretty powerful story. The story of Rachel and her tomb, as we've read in other places, and as we're going to read at Rosh Hashanah, it's a pretty important story. So we're going to read it as part of Jeremiah. Rachel and her role as our comforter. So Joseph has his questions that he wants
Still
answered
working on your lunch?
by his
No, I think
father.
you can have it.
Okay, Jacob also had stuff he wanted to get to. Here we go.
Jacob had also
Have your own
entertained
tea.
Okay.
doubts on 5
You're
points
welcome.
when he was about to emigrate from Canaan to Egypt. Not know whether his descendants would lose themselves among the people of Egypt, whether he would die there and be buried there, and whether he would be permitted to see Joseph and see the sons of Joseph. God gave him the assurance, saying, I will go down with you into Egypt, and I will surely bring you up again after your death, and your descendants also, and Joseph will put his hand upon your eyes. When the time approached for the fulfillment of the divine promise, God appeared to Jacob, and he said, I promised to fulfill your wish, and the time of fulfillment has come.
Well, Jacob had also said before he left to go to Egypt, he didn't know whether he could go. And God told him, it's going to be okay. And you're going to see Joseph there again in the land, and he'll be with you when you die. So now this is the moment. Now we're here at that moment where Joseph will be here with him as he passes. And here it's interesting. We don't get the angel of death here. We get the Ruach HaKodesh, which again, another name perhaps I would say for the Shekhinah, the divine presence. But it goes back again to this idea that when Jacob was on his deathbed, he was surrounded by God and God's presence. So let's, anybody, somebody wanted to say something? Anybody? Okay.
Mark, before you go on, Francine had asked a question about why it's the feminine form Shekhinah in this story as opposed to another one.
Another form.
Another form. It's a good
Okay,
question.
so So the word different names for God's presence,
Mhm.
and the word the term Shekhinah is definitely a feminine form, and people kind of read into that too, that there's a feminine divine presence, and I mean it's still obviously an important part of feminist liturgy to refer to the Shekhinah. Well, let's put it this way: because other forms of God's name are male, the fact that there's feminine forms of it is a good thing, I guess. I think the bigger issue is that the rabbis, and even before that, the writers of the Torah really tried to impress on us that God was not male or female. But of course, there is that tendency to again see God as people wanted to see God. They wanted God to manifest in certain ways. Look, people. The Midrash is basing this on Jacob's last moments, and the fact that God's with him. God appears to him, and this idea is in the rabbinic in other parts of rabbinic texts, is that it's the Shekhinah that's with somebody as they die, and so it's kind of consistent with other places, but I mean I don't know what people. I mean, some people want to say the Shekhinah is a more maternal, comforting form of God. That the Shekhinah is the embracing wings of God, or the protector of God. The protecting form of God, of God's presence. I mean, they're nice images, and I mean they're pretty. They're poetic, but again,
it's difficult, I think, to not see God as both male and female.
Yeah,
I understand the rabbis wanting it to be male and fierce and a powerful king and a ruler and a warrior, but doesn't our experience lead us to see God as?
And the rabbis didn't want us to only see God as a warrior. I mean, they really didn't. I mean, there are parts of the text of the Bible that are more in those lines. And I don't want to make an excuse for patriarchal or male forms of God, but I will tell you this: what's interesting is when we find these old texts, Canaanite texts or Babylonian texts, that we find that the words for God there, we know Baal or El or any of these male gods, deities. What we find is that when it came to Psalms and some of these poems and songs that the Jews we had versions of, that what we find is that a lot of the things that have the most male-oriented language in them in the Torah were actually lifted from Canaanite stuff. It was almost like, if you look at the least creative stuff that we did, and I only say least creative because we have the Canaanite version of it, then when we go, oh yeah, you didn't even bother to change it that much, and that was all male centric. It was all male images of God, and it seems as though, again, when we were lazy about it, we did that. The rabbis were many years later and can do things with the Shekhinah and the Ruach HaKodesh, with the Holy Spirit, where they really try to de-anthropomorphize it, make it less of a man, like less human. And they really do try to do that. But they play around with it, and they definitely do have the Shekhinah, and they have the Ruach HaKodesh, they have the Holy Spirit here. All of these words that, again, would eventually, a lot of them would get into the Christian lexicon too. But the rabbis really did strive to make God not a male or female form. They really worked at it. I mean, they really did. They were not looking like the writers of the Bible which were, hey, let's give people melodies and poems that are familiar to them, and let's just change the name of God in it, right? Let's take out the word Baal and throw in the word Elohim, or Yud-Hey, the unpronounceable name of God, and let's take out the word Baal and put it in there. And those are really, again, the most patriarchal forms of God that we see. This is kind of almost, let's just do what everyone else is doing and just, make a nice melody for it. And you didn't even think about what the consequences are with the rest of the text. So the rabbis didn't do that. I mean, they did have a little bit more creativity. And again, they realized that there was a consequence to this, which is if you make God look like a man, you're going to have idolatry. You're going to have people, you didn't even bother making it different. So what difference does it make? You call God Baal and I call God Adonai, and it's the same God. And it wasn't. So I think the rabbis were a little bit more sophisticated and realized the consequences of this. But again, I mean, I like the fact that they use these other words. Maybe again, that's part of the deal. You got to use other names for God. You have to have these other maybe female visions of God too. But again, I don't want to overplay it because it's not as feminine or feminist as people would like to have it now. But I don't begrudge them for doing it. It's just, it really wasn't the job. The rabbis weren't really trying to be proto-feminists. They were really just trying to make God not like Zeus and like all these other gods that people were, saying, oh, this.
The Greek certainly follows that tradition, in that Sophia is always feminine.
Yeah.
The spirit of God is.
Yeah, and you start seeing it though, but you start seeing that in later Greek writing. It's not part of, of Homer and pre-Homer, pre-Homer mythology. It is definitely
the Greeks had all kinds of female gods.
Yeah, but they also don't start referring to Sophia and kind of like holy.
Well, they had Athena, goddess of wisdom.
There's no question that they had goddesses. I'm not saying that, but the idea of like this anthropomorphic, when Greek mythology started, there was a process of Greek mythology becoming less and less idolatrous, if you will, and more kind of abstract. And as they did that, that's when Jews started saying, oh, that's kind of similar to our more abstract visions of God. And that's where you get blendings of Greco-Jewish texts like Philo and some of these other people. But I want to say that the rabbis really did have this issue where they really did wanted to make God as formless and as non-human as possible. And again, the rabbis are going to use the methods that they have, and they're going to use language that people like, and they use stories and motifs that people like. I love those stories. I love those mythological stories. But
Christian fundamentalists, on the other hand, I think like the image of God is absolutely male.
There is no.
I forget where it is, but there is one place in the Tanakh that has Adonai Mecholelecha. And Mecholelecha is clearly a female function. So it's a female verb.
There are other places where, it's more in rabbinic. I'm thinking of it more in rabbinic texts where God clearly is working in a feminine form. But again, it's through Shekhinah. It's through the God of mercy. God being the God of the womb of mercy or of. But again, these are images that today people have really gone wild with, and I like, man, I don't mean wild in a bad way. They've taken it and they've adapted it for their own, for our own language, which again, we're working really hard to, and again, maybe that's reflective of our ideals of not having God as a man, because again, the famous phrase that, where God is a man, man are gods. And this is something that Judaism really has been fighting for, I think, fighting against for a long time.
Rabbi.
Yeah.
If you ask the rabbi in Sedona, God is a female.
Well, look, with all due respect, I mean, look, you could go to the, synagogues in other parts of Mea Shearim in Israel, and they'll tell you God is a man. So and again, I will say that for the most part, Orthodoxy, if you even push ultra-Orthodox Jews, if God is a man, they'll have a hard time arguing it because they know that we've been fighting against that image. But yeah, it's a problem. And again, just because you balance it out doesn't make it equal. And I think the best thing to do is to try to fight against this idea of seeing God as a man or a woman. But it's tough.
But also in that synagogue, if you're a male, you're a second-class citizen.
Well, that's also that's becoming a that is
The
not
board
unheard
is
of.
all female?
Yes.
Is it?
Yeah.
I thought it's
I mean,
not.
if you're not a male, she will not talk to you. If you're a male,
I see.
barely, she'll barely talk to you.
It is an interesting. There have been some interesting corrections, if you will, very hard the other direction. But again, that's part of who we are. Is the way the way we see God is the way we see ourselves, right? So, back to the text. Joseph is going to fight real hard here for his sons, and this is the part of the text that we're going to kind of. We're only going to go through Joseph's sons today. We're not going to get to the rest of the tribes, but you'll see there's a lot here, and it's also about the sons. It's not just about Joseph's sons. It's not just about the grandsons. It's also about Jacob's sons. So let's read what happens here.
Yes, please. I didn't mean to be such a.
The Holy Spirit made known to Jacob that Joseph was coming to him, and he strengthened himself and sat upon the bed in order to pay due respect to the representative of the government. Though Joseph was his son, he was also viceroy and entitled to special marks of honor. Besides, Jacob desired to make the impression of being a man in good health. He wanted to avoid the possibility of having his blessing of Joseph and Joseph's sons questioned as the act of an irresponsible person.
Wow. So the Torah, why don't you read the next paragraph too?
He strengthened himself spiritually as well as physically by prayer to God, in which he besought him to let the Holy Spirit descend upon him at the time of his giving the blessings to the sons of Joseph.
Yep. So let's do the last part first, which is that he wants the Ruach HaKodesh. He wants the Holy Spirit to be on him so he can give the blessings to his grandsons. So that's one thing. But where does this all come from? It all comes from the fact that when his son and grandsons come into the room, it tells us that he stood up. He strengthened up in his bed. So here it is, right here. And it says right here, Israel summoned his strength, and it says, Vayit Hazek Yisrael, Vayeshev al Hamitah. He strengthened and he sat up in his bed. Now, the assumption here is that this took all of his strength to do this, that he, that what does it tell us by the fact that he got up, sat up in his bed and got strengthened? Well, he got extra spiritual strength, but also he wanted to show his family that in this last moment of his life, that he was strong, he was of enough physical strength to bless them, but also he had the mental capacity to bless them, because he didn't want anyone to question his ability to do this, his mental competence in doing this. And by sitting up, he makes it clear to everybody that he knows exactly what he's doing right now when he blesses his grandsons. So this is a really cool scene, and that it actually tells us that he, that he wanted to have those last blessings be a part of all of his strength. All right, so what happens when they're there?
When Joseph appeared in the company of his two sons, his father said to him, "In all the 17 years you have been visiting me, you never brought your sons with you, but now they have come, and I know the reason. If I bless them, I shall act in opposition to the word of God, who promised to make me the progenitor of 12 tribes. For if I adopt them as my sons, there will be 14 tribes. But if I do not bless them, it will plunge you in sorrow. So be it, I will bless them. But think not I do it because you supported me all these years. There is quite another reason. When I left my father's house to go to Haran, I offered up a prayer at Bethel, and I promised to give to God the 10th of all I owned. So far as my material possessions are concerned, I kept my vow, but I could not give the tithe of my sons, because according to the law, I had to withdraw from the reckoning the 4 sons, Reuben, Joseph, Dan, and Gad, that are the firstborn children of their mothers. When I returned, God again appeared to me in Bethel, and he said, be fruitful and multiply. But after this blessing, no son was born to me except Benjamin alone. And it cannot be but that God meant Manasseh and Ephraim when he spoke of a nation and a company of nations. If now I have found favor in your sight, the 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, even as Reuben and Shimon, shall be mine. And then I shall be able to give a 10th part of my 10 sons to the Lord. And I shall leave this world free from the sin of not keeping my vow to the Lord concerning the tithe giving.
Wow. So this is a really interesting scene here, explanation, a little complicated. So let me kind of explain what's going on here. Joseph wants his sons to be blessed and to be given the same rights that he would have, so that the grandsons are elevated to the tribes. So we know that Ephraim and Manasseh are equal tribes of the 12 tribes. But how can they be? Because again, as Jacob says, if I bless them and make them 2 more tribes, then I have 14 tribes. I don't have 14 tribes, I have 12. I know that. God told me that. So you've put me in this kind of, you've put me in this quandary. You've put me in this, how do I fix this position here? How do I get out of this? Because again, I know all these promises, and I know that we have these lists of tribes, and Ephraim and Manasseh are on this list, that they're on these lists of tribes. So how do I do this? Now I will tell you something, by the way. It's an interesting connection to tomorrow night, Wednesday night. We're going to read the Torah portion. We're going to read the section Kitavo, which talks about the Ma'aser, the tithe. And it tells us that, and there's this interesting kind of understanding that we have to tithe. We have to tithe. Well, you can understand why we tithe. We tithe because God gives us a blessing, and we want to show our appreciation. We give a 10th. But there's this interesting idea in the Torah. We have this maaser that's given, and we have this ritual for it. This vidui in Deuteronomy, in Kitavo, it talks about you present your offering and you say, God's giving me this thing, and I give you, God, my offering. And there's this interesting idea of like, why do we do this? And there's the possibility that we do this because Jacob never did it. That Jacob never was able to give the tithe because he never was able to have the blessings. Now, he had a lot of blessings, but he also had a lot of tough times. And he never actually had the peace that comes with what we say when we give the tithe, which is, thank you, God, for giving me shalom. And Jacob never has this. Now, Jacob does give a tithe, or can finally give a tithe here, the rabbis say. And that tithe is Levi. That tribe is his, that tithe is the tribe, is his son, the Levites, because Levi does not get a tribal portion. Levi is going to be dedicated to God. The Levites are the priests of the people. And so what God does here, what Jacob does here to some extent for God is to say, I'm giving you my son, Levi. And Levi's position now as not being part of the tribal portions means that there's an opening for another son. And because one of those sons, again, Ephraim or Manasseh, either one, that would be one of them, what happens is Joseph comes out of the list too. And now there's no Joseph by himself. There's Ephraim and Manasseh. So essentially Joseph and Levi come out, and Ephraim and Manasseh take their place. And so when we get tribal lists in the Torah later on, in the book of Numbers or Joshua and any of the places where we have a list of tribal portions, we have 12 tribes, but Levi and Joseph are not there. So this is what happens here. Levi gets pulled out. Joseph gets essentially the double portion that he always said he was going to get. And so this rectifies everything. This helps all those problems go out. Now Joseph got his double portion. There's 12 tribes. Levi gets to be a dedication to God. He's tithed essentially, and everything has its place. Every piece of this now can come together. And so this is why this section, why Jacob is given this line in the Midrash, because it explains how we can have Ephraim and Manasseh. So here's what happens with this tithing, if you will. All right.
Joseph consented to do his father's will, and Jacob tithed to his sons, consecrating Levi to the Holy One, and appointing him to be chief of his brethren. He enjoined his sons to have a care that there should never fail them a son of Levi in the priestly succession. And it happened that, of all the tribes, Levi was the only one that never proved faithless to the covenant of the fathers.
Now, this was clearly written by a Levite, because there are Levites who are not good people. There are definitely, Korach would be one of the ones that come right to the top of the list of people who don't always do the right thing. As a matter of fact, Aaron, the first high priest, doesn't always do the right thing.
And his sons don't do the right thing.
What?
And his sons don't do the right thing.
No. So there are definitely examples of Levites who don't do the right thing. However, there is always a Levite, a good Levite around. And there seems to be this impression that we get through some of the other tribes, but it's always a little precarious. The person in charge of the tribe isn't really the one who's going to keep this going. We're going to dodge a bullet here, and we'll get into the next generation. But there seems to be this continuous chain that there's always a Levite who can be counted on. There's always a Levite out there who can do the right thing. Not always the case with the other tribes. Again, maybe the grandkids are okay. The grandfather was good. The grandkids are okay. The kid in between, not so good. But the Levites, there's always a good Levite around. So that's kind of what how the rabbis interpret this. Again, let's continue with Ephraim and Manasseh.
Thus, Jacob adopted Manasseh and Ephraim to be his own sons, even as Reuben and Shimon were his sons. They were entitled, like the others, to a portion in the Holy Land, and like the others, they were to bear standards on their journey through the desert. Satisfied as to Jacob's intentions concerning his sons, Joseph asked his father about his mother's burial place, and Jacob spoke, saying, "As you live, your wish to see your mother lying by my side in the grave does not exceed my own. I had joy in life only as long as she was alive, and her death was the heaviest blow that ever fell upon me."
Okay, so pause right there. So they get back to this issue of why is Rachel not buried with Jacob? And why is she not why will they never be together in death? And again, Jacob had other wives, so you could say, well, he's at least lying next to Leah. Okay, but that doesn't do anything for Joseph. And most importantly, Jacob does talk about this on his deathbed. So the rabbis want to tell us that Jacob does not like the fact that Rachel isn't buried. This wasn't his choice. He says to Joseph, it wasn't up to me. It wasn't my choice. And I loved your mother. So let's read. This is a really powerful text, which we know, again, it's powerful in the Torah, but it's really powerful here too. Yeah.
Joseph questioned him. "Perhaps you had to bury her on the way because she died during the rainy season, and you could not carry her body through the rain to our family sepulcher?" "No," replied Jacob, "she died in the springtime, when the highways are clean and firm." "Joseph, grant me permission to take up her body now and place it in our family burial place." Jacob, "No, my son, that you may not do. I was unwilling to bury her on the way, but the Lord commanded it." The reason of the command was that God knew that the temple would be destroyed and Israel would be carried away into banishment, and the exiles would ask the patriarchs to intercede for them with God, but God would not hearken to them. On their way to the land of the stranger, they would pass the grave of Rachel, and they would throw themselves upon it and beseech their mother to make intercession for them with God. And Rachel would pray to God on their behalf. O Lord of the world, look upon my tears and have compassion upon my children. But if you will not take pity on them, then indemnify me for the wrong done to me. Unto her prayer God will hearken, and he will have mercy on Israel. Therefore was Rachel buried in the way.
Yep. So when we talk about powerful, by the way, feminist imagery in the Midrash, and it goes back to the Torah, this is one right here, was Rachel praying for her descendants and comforting them. And if she is not buried where she is, they won't see her grave as they pass to Babylonia. They won't see that on the road into exile. And that Rachel's prayer, not Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob's, not the other patriarchs, but Rachel's prayer is the one that's going to keep them alive. That it's Rachel who's able to intercede on their behalf, and that's who God's going to listen to, Rachel. So it's a pretty powerful text. It's one of the things that we read about in the book of Jeremiah, and again we read it on the second day of Rosh Hashanah. We read two amazing women's prayers on a reference. One of them, of course, is the prayer of Hannah, the first day of Rosh Hashanah. The Haftarah is the story of Hannah's praying for her son to be able to have a child, Samuel. And the next day we read about, it's not the whole text of Jeremiah, but it's part of the text of Jeremiah. Jeremiah praying, saying that Rachel's weeping for her children. And so these two powerful women, Rachel and Hannah, are the people who are the models for prayer and the models that we're supposed to look at for how we talk to God. So what's interesting, of course, is that we named our first daughter Rachel Hannah, partly because of this, because these two women, these two matriarchs are examples of how we're supposed to pray and not give up. Both of them had problems having children. Both of them took their struggles and turned them into lessons for other people and inspirations for other people of not giving up, and that once your prayer has been answered, that's not where it ends. Our job we're not done, and we wash our hands and go, hey, God answered my prayer, I'm done. We're all good now. It doesn't work that way. And so Rachel is one of those examples. And so Joseph hears from his father, your mother has a role to play later on in history, and we can't, as much as it hurts me that I'm not with her, she has a much more important role to play, and it's quite frankly a role that I can't play. She can play it, but I can't. So it's pretty powerful. It's a pretty powerful text. It's the rabbis, again, thousands of years ago, pointing out these connections, amplifying them. And again, if anybody wants, you don't have to look far to find feminist midrash, and you don't have to look hard in the rabbinic text to see the power that women have, the spiritual power women have. And this is one of those examples. Again, there are patriarchal, stuff in the midrash as well, but there are some very powerful texts here about the power that our mothers, that our ancestors have. So let us continue with some of the tougher parts of this.
Now Jacob desired to bless the sons of Joseph, but the Holy Spirit made him see Jeroboam, the descendant of Ephraim, and Jehu, the descendant of Manasseh, how they would seduce Israel to idolatry. And the Shekinah forsook him as he was about to lay his hands upon the heads of his grandsons. He said to Joseph, Is it possible that you did not marry the mother of your children according to the law? Joseph thereupon brought his wife Asenat to his father, and pointing to her marriage contract, he said, "This one is my wife, whom I married as is proper with a marriage contract and due ceremony. I pray you, my father, bless my sons, if only for the sake of this pious woman."
Wow. So again, another feminist, if you will, a little bit, is Jacob sees the bad people that are going to be Ephraim, from Ephraim and Manasseh. Again, in particular, Jeroboam, the king, and Yehu, another king of the northern tribes, who are not good people. And so he says, I can't bless, I'm what can I do now? I can't do this. And again, the Shekhinah, and again, here the Shekhinah and the Holy Spirit are used synonymously. I'm not sure that the text, I'm not sure what the original text had, but here in one line it says the Holy Spirit, and the other one it says the Shekhinah, Ruach HaKodesh, and again the Shekhinah. And so Jacob questions Joseph and says, "Did you have a legal marriage? Show me your ketubah. I want to make sure that this is a legitimate marriage." And the answer, of course, is that Osnat is a righteous woman. I mean, is a very special woman, as the Midrash has told us in other places. So it's not her. We're gonna have some bad descendants too, and so they kind of recognize this. But again, this is all part of the blessings for all the sons. Is that there are going to be bad and good people that come out of these people. And by the way, sometimes they're the same person, because we're going to read next week about Samson, Shimshon, who's from the tribe of Dan. Is he good or is he bad? It's a little bit of both. So keep that in mind, that Jacob having the prophetic power, and again, the rabbis, of course, are writing this, that he knows not all of his descendants are going to be so good. They're not going to live up to the expectations. So here's what happens when he actually blesses Ephraim and Manasseh. We'll read these last few paragraphs today.
Jacob bade his grandsons approach close to him, and he kissed and embraced them, in the hope that his joy in them would lure back the Holy Spirit. But his hope was vain. Joseph concluded that the time was not favorable for blessing, and he decided to go away until a more propitious opportunity presented itself. First, however, proving to his father that his sons had been initiated in the covenant of Abraham.
That's pretty wild. We'll kind of leave it at that. Well, no, I guess we can. Yeah, he needs to make sure that his dad knows that these are Jewish kids. Where does that even come from? Well, one of my favorite parts, and you know this is because I've talked about it before. Here's the Torah text. Your two sons, Jacob says to Joseph, your two sons shall be mine. Ephraim and Manasseh shall be mine no less than Reuben and Shimon. That's what the Torah says. We just read that. He says, by the way, we didn't talk about this. Progeny born after you, they're yours. They're not included. You have more kids, they're not tribes. So you have 3 and 4, they're your inheritance. They're not my inheritance. But then we have this line again. Why do we have Rachel mentioned here? Because when I was returning, Rachel died to my sorrow while I was journeying into the land of Canaan, right? And I'm buried there. So the rabbis are kind of, again, why is this line here? Because Joseph brings it up. And then the next line. Noticing Joseph's sons, he asks, who are these? And Joseph said to his father, these are my sons whom God has given me here. Bring them up to me, he said, that I may bless them. So when he says, who are these? You know, the rabbis are saying, what's going on here? Does he not recognize them? Does he not, has he not met them before? We read other Midrashim that Manasseh has been helping out his dad all along as kind of like his number 2. This seems like a weird scene here, which also kind of, you wonder, how much time are they spending together? The rabbis told us that Jacob's been teaching Ephraim. We have a midrash that Ephraim is like his student, his protege, is working with Jacob. It doesn't seem like that here in the text. And the rabbis know that. This scene is a very powerful one where Joseph presents his sons and Jacob doesn't even seem to recognize them. So the rabbis call into question again whether or not Jacob did really know his grandsons. Did he spend time with them? Did he have to prove to his father that these kids were indeed being raised Jewish? And so did he show them that they were circumcised? By the way, it's a little problematic because the Egyptians, according to what we know, also circumcised. So just because they'd be circumcised doesn't mean that they were good Jewish kids. But the rabbis seem to think that because, again, by the time that they were interacting with the Egyptians were no longer circumcising themselves because the Egyptians were following Greek tradition, which was very anti-circumcision. So the fact that they would, in their time, think the Egyptians didn't circumcise is understandable because the Egyptians didn't circumcise then. And the rabbis wouldn't have necessarily known that the Egyptians 1,000, 2,000 years before had been circumcising. So anyways, they essentially, that's called into question. But this scene is a very powerful one because does Jacob really even recognize these grandkids? Do they look so Egyptian that he's not even sure that they're his family? That's the kind of scene that I've always imagined here, which is that Joseph has not had his kids around the family a lot, but he's raising them as Egyptians, that he's probably doesn't want them in Goshen around the rest of the Israelite people. He wants Ephraim and Manasseh to have the good Egyptian upbringing. They're going to Chote and the Egyptian whatever equivalent of upper class schooling that they would have had, Andover or whatever. And so he doesn't want them to have contact with the old people from Canaan, the Israel people, the shepherds. So I always thought that scene was kind of wild, but I also like this idea that Ephraim and Manasseh are like the kids with the baseball caps going to see their grandfather from the old country, and he's wearing his black robes and his or maybe by this point he's wearing a yarmulke on a bed, but he sees two kids coming to him in baseball caps and say, "What are these? Who are these kids? These are your grandkids, Father. These are yours," right? So it's a very powerful scene, but the rabbis point out there's something strange here, which is, why does he not know them? Why is he talking to them like this? So here's what happens.
Outside of his father's chamber, alone with his sons, he threw himself down before God and besought him to show mercy. And he bade his sons do likewise, saying, "Be not content with your high station, for worldly honors are but for a time. Entreat God to be merciful, and let the Shekinah descend upon my father, that he bless you both." Then spoke God to the Holy Spirit, "How long yet shall Joseph suffer? Reveal yourself quickly and enter into Jacob, that he may be able to bestow blessings." So are God arguing with himself there?
well, there definitely seems to be aspects of God here that are having. I don't know if it's a Trinity, but how many different aspects of God are there here in discussion that God is not so sure whether or not this is the time or if there is ever a time that this is going to be able to go down. But again, there is this tension here in this moment, and here it is.
Should I go on?
Yep.
In the words of Jacob, Ephraim and Manasseh, even as Reuben and Shimon, shall be mine. Joseph had noticed his father's preference for his younger son, Ephraim. It made him very anxious about his older son's birthright, and he was careful to put the two lads before his father in such wise that Manasseh should stand opposite Jacob's right hand, and Ephraim opposite his left hand. But
Interesting.
Ephraim, on account of his modesty, was destined for greater things than his older brother Manasseh. And God bade the Holy Spirit prompt Jacob to give the birthright to Ephraim. Now, when Joseph observed his father put his right hand upon Ephraim's head, he made an attempt to remove it to Manasseh's head. But Jacob warned him off, saying, "What, you would displace my hand against my will, the hand that overcame the prince of the angel hosts, who is as large as 1/3 of the world? I know things not known to you. I know what Reuben did to Bilhah and what Judah did to Tamar. How much more do I know things known to you? Think you I know not what your brethren did to you, because you would betray nothing whenever I asked you? I know it. Manasseh also shall become great. The judge Gideon will descend from him, but his younger brother will be the ancestor of Joshua, who will bring the sun and the moon to a standstill, though they have dominion over the whole earth from end to end."
All right. So let's talk about what just happened here. Because again, this Midrash harkens back to this idea that they've been keeping him in the dark the whole time. And of course that I know what happened, what your brothers did to you. He says, think I didn't know what they did? You didn't tell me. I know, you didn't tell me, but I know what happened. And again, this is taken in this scene where Jacob basically tells his son, I know what I'm doing. When I'm blessing Ephraim over Manasseh, it's not that I don't know what's going on. I know exactly what's going on. I know that Ephraim is going to do bigger things than Manasseh. The irony, of course, here is that Joseph is trying to get Jacob not to give the bigger blessing to the younger son, which he was the recipient of himself. So he's trying to stop it from happening. He doesn't want it to happen anymore. But of course, it's been happening every generation up until now. And it's going to continue. The story of the oldest getting everything or getting the biggest chunk or being blessed, it's not going to work in Judaism. It's not going to work in our tradition. We're going to be putting that on its head. And of course, where's that story maybe the most important version of that? With King David. The fact that David was the youngest of the sons of Jesse, the rabbis, by that point, it's already a well-known thing. We always upend the traditional norms of the oldest son gets the blessing. But again, here, there's a little bit more to it too, which is that Jacob now let's make sure everybody knows, I know what's always happening. You think I don't know what happened with Judah and Tamar? You don't think I know what Reuben and Bilhah did? I know all this stuff. I don't talk about it. I don't have to get into it with you, but I know it. You can't keep it from me. And so he says, I know what's been going on. Don't think that I'm oblivious to it. So it's a very powerful reveal there, which is I know all along everything that's been going. There have been no secrets. And what's important here is that let's finish this off. Let's keep going.
Thus did Jacob set Ephraim the younger above Manasseh the older, and thus it remained to all times. In the list of the generations, Manasseh comes after Ephraim, and so it was in the allotment of the portions in the Holy Land, and so it was in the placing of the camps and the standards of the tribes, and in the dedication of the tabernacle. Everywhere, Ephraim preceded Manasseh.
So it's hard. It's hard for us to remember that Manasseh is actually the older son, because on all the lists, one of the things that's consistent is that Manasseh is always after, always comes second. And that's not the way they were born. Manasseh was the older son. So the good thing, of course, is that Manasseh will also be important. This great judge, Gideon, who's so strong and a great leader, if you will, for a good chunk of time, he's from the tribe of Manasseh. There are other people who will be from the tribe of Manasseh Interestingly, it doesn't talk about Jephthah, maybe because he was not good enough, maybe to be considered to be right. I mean, all these people did bad things too, but Jephthah may not have been good enough even to be listed here as a great person. And of course, Joshua comes from the tribe of Ephraim, and he's one of the greatest leaders after Moses, or really, I guess you could say the greatest leader after Moses. Joshua is from the tribe of Ephraim. So, there's Gideon, but there's also the bottom line. Ephraim is really special. And again, are the rabbis telling us something that the Torah kind of tells us, but doesn't tell us hard enough? Ephraim was a much bigger, much more powerful tribe than Manasseh. Ephraim was a rival to the tribe of Judah. When those two tribes went at it, you're literally talking about a civil war. Those two tribes made the rest of the tribes look like little tiny tribes, like add them all up. They're like the tribe of Ephraim. So Ephraim is a really powerful tribe. Judah is a really powerful tribe. And those were realities. By the time of Joshua, by the time of King David, that's the reality. Ephraim was a very powerful tribe and had to be reckoned with. The way I like to compare it is it's New York and Virginia by the time of the Civil War. Yeah, there were a lot of other states, and there were states that were pretty powerful, but those two states, maybe New York and Massachusetts, it's hard to say which was the most powerful by the time of the Civil War, but those are states that a lot of stuff's going down. There's a lot of commerce, there's a lot of power, a lot of political power, a lot of people. And with people, a mass of people comes power. Those two states, it's not the whole Civil War was between those two states, but there were a lot of people who died from those two states during the Civil War. And it's a reverse. The North, in this case, would have been like Judah, the tribe that's trying to keep everybody together. And Ephraim was more like Virginia. But these tribes were disproportionately powerful. And Ephraim was one of those tribes.
Yeah.
So, yeah. All right. Let's finish up a little bit with Ephraim. This is kind of where we're. I think could be able to get to this right here. So maybe not. We'll see. Yeah, we'll be close. All right. So the blessing. Sorry.
The blessing bestowed upon his grandchildren by Jacob was as follows. Oh, that it be the will of God that you walk in the ways of the Lord like my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, and may the angel that redeemed me from all evil give his aid to Joshua and Gideon and reveal himself unto them. May your names be named in Israel, and like fishes may you grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And as fishes are protected by the water, so may you be protected by the merits of Joseph.
Yeah, and by the way, this is why you'll sometimes see in amulets, Jewish amulets, fish. You'll sometimes see a fish amulet.
Really?
This is why. Because fish are protected by the water, and they multiply really fast. So,
were we using fish amulets before the Christians were? Just out of curiosity?
Yeah.
I don't know that it is. Amulets were. It's hard to tell. I don't know if we found actual amulets that are that old, but this text is the text of I'm only saying the amulets because they're not real popular, but when you see evil eyes and the hamsas, there sometimes will be a fish on those, and sometimes the fish will be used for food as kind of a reminder of this promise that you will be like, you multiply like the fish and you'll be protected by the water. People will not be able to get you. But there's other parts of this that are not so good.
The words like to fishes were used by Jacob for the purpose of intimating the manner of death awaiting the Ephraimites, the descendants of Joseph. As fish are caught by their mouth, so the Ephraimites were in later days to invite their doom by their peculiar lisp. At the same time, Jacob's words contained the prophecy that Joshua, the son of the man Nun, the fish, would lead Israel into the Holy Land. And in his words lay still another prophecy, with reference to the 60,000 men children begot in the same night as Moses, all cast into the river with him and saved for the sake of his merits. The number of boys thrown to the fishes in the river that night was equal to the number of men in Israel upon the earth.
Yep. That's a strange midrash. A couple strange things there. The first, let's explain. Why is this a problem? This fish, because actually the descendants of Joseph, the Ephraimites, when they go to war against the tribes with this battle of during the time of the judges, a very famous scene with the shibboleth and sibboleth. The fact that they cannot, the tribe of Ephraim pronounces the word shibboleth differently, ends up being the way that they get found out. So during the war, the Ephraimites go to war against they go to war against Jephthah's group. They get routed, completely routed. Even though there's more of them, the Ephraimites destroy them. I mean, the Manasseh destroy them, and as they're retreating and trying to escape, they're going back across the Jordan, and as they go across, the Manasseh say to them, pronounce the word sibboleth or shibboleth, and because they can't pronounce it, they get found out and they get killed. That's their giveaway. So that word shibboleth actually in sibboleth in English is actually it's a word. It means something that gives you away or is an indicator of who you are, is a sibboleth, right? So if you look it up, it's actually an English word. But so here, that's an explanation for why why the Ephraimites are also like fish, and that they'll give it away. But then this other weird thing about the water is that the day that Moses got thrown into the water, 60,000 other Jewish kids got thrown into the water that day alone. But because of Moses, they all survived. None of the other kids that went in the water that day got killed. It's an interesting midrash for so many reasons. Number one, because it tells us that the miracle was done on Moses' behalf. But here's another weird thing. 60,000 kids were dying a day in Egypt, according to the midrash, this midrash. So it was a mass genocide of kids that was going on during the time of Moses. Let's finish up.
Ephraim received a special and separate blessing from his grandfather. Jacob said to him, Ephraim, my son, you are the head of the academy, and in the days to come, my most excellent and celebrated descendants will be called Ephrati after you.
So again, that's an idea that the name, and it's still a name, by the way, Ephrati, which means an Ephraimite, that those people would we call those people who are the top of the class, Ephrati. All right.
Joseph received 2 gifts from his father. The first was Shechem, the city that Jacob had defended with sword and bow against the depredations of the Amorite kings when they tried to take revenge upon his sons for the outrage committed there. And the second gift was the garments made by God for Adam and passed from hand to hand until they came into the possession of Jacob. Shechem was his reward because with his chastity, he stemmed the tide of immorality that burst loose in Shechem first of all. Besides, he had a prior claim upon the city. Shechem, son of Hamor, the master of the city, had given it to Dinah as a present, and the wife of Joseph, Asenath, being the daughter of Dinah, the city belonged to him by right.
Interesting. So through Osnat, who is part Shechemite, Jacob's family owned Shechem, and Joseph gets Shechem, which of course is where he's going to be buried. He's going to be buried in that town. So that is that's one thing that Joseph got from his father, was the city of Shechem, which technically speaking he owned anyways through his wife, Dinah's daughter. So that's an interesting you're giving me something I already own. But it's a whole interesting idea that Shechem, the place where Joseph will wind up being buried, is Joseph's inheritance. All right, that's one thing that, again, he gets. But here's the interesting, like mythological, midrashic thing that we love, or at least I love, the magical cloak. Here we go.
Adam's clothes Jacob had received from Esau. He had not taken them from his brother by force, but God had caused them to be given to him as a reward for his good deeds. They had belonged to Nimrod. Once, when the mighty hunter caught Esau in his preserves and forbade him to go on the chase, they agreed to determine by combat what their privileges were. Esau had taken counsel with Jacob, and he had advised him never to fight with Nimrod while he was clothed in Adam's garments. The two now wrestled with each other, and at the time Nimrod was not dressed in Adam's clothes. The end was that he was slain by Esau. Thus the garments worn by Adam fell into the hands of Esau. From him they passed into Jacob's, and he bequeathed them to Joseph.
Yeah, so this is this garment that you can't be defeated. It's magical. It's a magical cloak and magical for great hunters, right? So we have Nimrod, who's the great hunter named in Genesis, and then later on Esau's a great hunter. He must have wound up with Nimrod's clothes. Why? Because he defeated him, but only because Jacob told him how to do it, which is you got to make sure he's not wearing those clothes when you're fighting. You can't beat him when he's wearing those clothes. So that's kind of a cool, almost Greco-Roman mythological, everybody, I shouldn't say Greco-Roman, it's culturally, whatever, Eurocentric, but most cultures had, their great heroes had garments. But here, Joseph winds up with a coat of many colors, and now he winds up with the coat of power, the coat of combat, if you will. So that's another thing that Joseph gets, is he gets another garment, and this is the garment that is actually goes all the way back to Adam and Eve. It is so powerful that it was maybe that first clothing that God made for Adam, because remember, Adam knows that he's naked, and then what's he going to do? God makes some garments. So these are not just any kind of garments. This is made by the greatest tailor on earth, in the world, in the universe. It's God's garment. So again, it's a magical garment that now Joseph has too. Now, there's one last thing we're going to finish with, which is what does Joseph also get? Those are great gifts, a city and an amazing garment. No, this is the best.
Jacob also taught Joseph 3 signs whereby to distinguish the true Redeemer, who would deliver Israel from the bondage of Egypt. He would proclaim the ineffable name, appoint elders, and use the word pakod in addressing the people.
Yeah, which are all things that Moses does. And so how do we know that Moses was the Redeemer? Because he had those ability, he had those things. He had those gifts. Interesting because, it seems that Moses had to prove himself when he came back, that by doing these things, the people who that Joseph was able to maybe teach the next generations these secrets, and so then they would know that Moses was truly the right guy. But of course, there's another little conceit here too, which is that when there is a Messiah, there must be things that the Messiah does that will let people know that he is the Messiah, that people know, somebody knows what those secret things are. And if the person does those things, then they're the Messiah. So there's another thing in here too, which is that this didn't happen one time during the time of Moses, that there is some of this stuff going on later on. The next thing we're going to read next week, folks, is much more messianic than this. So the next one we're going to read about the other sons is even more messianic, because you get it in the blessings that Judah gets in the Torah. And so the rabbis had to talk about that. But there is this whole kind of concept of where the Messiah comes from and what roles that happen during that blessing, that the blessing wasn't about the kids. Not at all. I mean, according to the rabbis, like, don't pay attention to that. That's the illusion. has nothing to do. That's the outer garment. It's all about future times. It's all about the Messianic era. And it is very, very prophetic and even a little bit apocalyptic. So I will tell you that the blessings that we're going to read next week, the blessings of the 12 tribes, when we come back, will be, next week will be even more, I hope, Reverend Lynn, I hope you're able to join us next week. It's great to have you back, by the way, but I hope you'll be able to be there next week, because we're going to read some of the Jewish messianism, which was definitely there during the rabbinic period. It was not a unusual thing. That's a double negative, but it was a very, very common thing in the Midrash. We're going to see it next week. So everybody, thank you for being with us today. Thank you for helping me honor and remember my dad today with all of you. It was a nice way to study Torah and to do learning in his honor. And again, thank you everybody for being here today. And keep getting ready for the end of the year. Let's hope it ends strong, ends better. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks.
you.
Take care, everybody.